Welcome back to Farmyard Care, where we return to the roots of agriculture and look closely at the old knowledge that once kept farms alive through hard seasons. Take a moment and picture the year 1955. You are standing on a busy American farm at golden hour. The air carries the smell of wood smoke, fresh soil, livestock, and a kind of freedom that many farmers today can hardly imagine. Back then, a farmer might shoot a hawk from a fence post to protect his chickens, pour used motor oil on stubborn weeds, or burn off dry corn stalks before sunset without thinking twice. But here's the surprising part. Today, many of those once normal farming practices could bring that same farmer serious fines, sometimes reaching more than $10,000. Over the past century, agriculture has changed from a local, hands-on way of life built on family knowledge and practical experience into a heavily regulated industrial system. Many of the methods our grandparents used to survive blizzards, droughts, poor harvests, and hard economic times, often without electricity, commercial feed, or chemical fertilizers, are now restricted, discouraged, or even illegal in certain places. So were the old farmers careless? Or did they understand the land, animals, weather, and natural cycles in a way we have slowly forgotten? Today on Farmyard Care, we are counting down 10 special forgotten farming practices that could get you fined today. We will look at why these methods worked, why many of them were banned or regulated, and most importantly, what lessons we can still use to make our gardens, homesteads, and small farms stronger, safer, and more self-reliant. So hit that subscribe button, grab a cup of coffee, and let's step back into a time when food was not just a product on a shelf. It was living knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Number 10. Burning the stubble field after harvest. Picture a cool autumn evening in the 1950s. Across the Midwest, after the corn and wheat had been cut, you might see long orange lines of fire moving slowly over the fields, clearing what the harvest left behind. The method. Farmers burned their stubble fields on purpose after the fall harvest. To them, fire was a simple, powerful, and free helper. It destroyed weed seeds before they could take over the next season, reduced pests hiding in crop residue, including corn borer larvae, and left behind a layer of mineral-rich ash that went straight back into the soil. A small box of matches could save days of hard tractor work. By spring, those fields often came back clean, open, and ready for planting without depending on the chemical sprays we know today. The fine. Try doing that casually today, and the situation changes quickly. In 2026, agricultural burning is controlled by air quality rules and local burn regulations. Burn a field without the proper open burn permit, or let smoke drift across a road or highway, and you could face state fines starting around $500 and rising beyond $10,000 for a serious violation. The lesson. The old wisdom here was not just about burning waste. It was about using heat to manage pests, weeds, and nutrients in one cycle. Our grandparents used the elements to reset the field before the next growing season. Today, we still need to respect air quality and safety laws, but we can carry the idea forward through safer methods like soil solarization with clear tarps or careful flame weeding in garden beds where it is legal and controlled. Number 9. Turning hogs into the oak woods, also known as pennage. In the misty valleys of Appalachia and the Ozarks, autumn once meant it was time to let the hogs go into the woods. The method. Every October, farmers would drive their pigs into hardwood forests where the ground was covered with acorns, hickory nuts, and beech mast. The animals fattened themselves on a rich natural diet, and the farmer spent nothing on commercial feed. By December, those hogs could come back weighing around 200 pounds, raised largely by the forest itself. And the pork had a reputation of its own. In 2019, university food scientists studied acorn-finished pork and found omega-3 levels 3 times higher than ordinary commercial pork. The fine. Today, that old practice can bring serious trouble if done on public land. Modern land use rules and the U.S. Forest Service prohibit free-ranging livestock on national forest land. If a hog is found roaming where it should not be, it may be treated as feral, removed, or shot, and the owner could face penalties that may exceed $5,000 per animal. The lesson. The deeper lesson behind pennage is silvopasture, a smart combination of trees, forage, and livestock. We may not be able to turn pigs loose in national forests, but we can plant nut trees, fruit trees, and shade trees in our own pastures. When animals can harvest part of their own food from the land, we reduce feed costs, improve animal health, and work with nature instead of against it. Number 8. The hand-dug well near the barn. Before drilling rigs became common, many American farms depended on shallow wells lined with stone and dug by hand. The method: for convenience, a farmer and his family often dug the well close to the barn, sometimes within 100 feet. With a shovel, a pickaxe, and a great deal of determination, they could reach cold, clear water beneath the farm. One galvanized bucket on a rope might water the cattle, wash the clothes, fill the kitchen, and support the whole household. For many homesteads, that well was more than a water source. It was a symbol of independence. The danger was that many of those wells were too close to manure piles and livestock areas. Because they were shallow or poorly sealed, they could allow surface bacteria to move directly into the groundwater. Today, EPA wellhead protection principles and state setback laws often require drinking water wells to be located at least 100 to 200 feet away from livestock areas. Dig a new well beside the barn today without the proper county permit, and you may face forced abandonment, cleanup work, and remediation costs that can reach $20,000. The lesson: self-reliance is valuable, but it has to be matched with responsibility. Our grandparents treasured water independence, and we can still honor that idea in a safer way. Test well water every year. Understand how water moves across your land, and manage compost, manure, and animal waste so they never contaminate the groundwater your family and animals depend on. Number 7. Free-range chickens on the county road. Imagine a time when chickens really did cross the road and nobody called the county office about it. Back in 1948, many farm wives kept flocks of 50 or 60 laying hens that scratched around the yard, wandered into the neighbor's pasture, picked through the garden edges, and flew up into apple trees to roost at night. The method: these hens were not locked inside confinement houses. They worked for their feed every single day. They cleaned up ticks, grasshoppers, beetles, and weed seeds without costing the farmer a penny. In return, the family got strong, flavorful eggs with deep golden yolks. Of course, losing a few birds to coyotes, foxes, or hawks was seen as part of the natural cost of farming. It was not ideal, but it was accepted as part of raising poultry in an open landscape. The fine today: letting poultry roam freely onto a public road can quickly lead to livestock at large fines. And since the severe avian influenza outbreaks in 2015, biosecurity guidance from the USDA, along with many state-level rules, has made free-ranging birds much more restricted during disease threats and quarantines. Depending on the situation, violations can range from around $1,000 to as much as $20,000. The real lesson here is natural pest control. Chickens can still be one of the most useful working animals on a farm, but they need to be managed safely. Instead of letting them wander onto roads or neighboring land, use fenced runs or mobile chicken tractors to move them across pasture, lawn, or garden areas. They will scratch, fertilize, eat insects, reduce weed pressure, and improve the soil, while staying protected from traffic, predators, and disease risks. Number 6. Letting cattle drink directly from the creek. For more than 200 years, watering cattle was often as simple as fencing a pasture so the herd could walk straight down to a creek, river, pond, or spring-fed stream. The method: it was practical, free, and required no pumps, no pipes, and no electricity. The cattle drank whenever they wanted, cooled their legs and bodies during hot summer days, and moved along the banks as part of daily pasture life. For generations, muddy edges, trampled stream banks, and hoof prints in the water were simply seen as normal wear and tear on a working farm. Then water quality science began showing the hidden cost. Studies in the 1990s helped prove that cattle standing and defecating in streams could increase E. coli contamination, sediment runoff, and phosphorus pollution downstream. Today, EPA regulations under the Clean Water Act, along with state riparian protection rules, increasingly require farmers to fence livestock away from sensitive waterways. In states such as Maryland or Oregon, allowing direct livestock access to a protected waterway can bring fines from $1,000 to $10,000 per day, plus the cost of mandatory fencing and water system improvements. The lesson, the important truth is simple. Everyone lives downstream from somebody. Protecting riparian zones, the land along streams and rivers, protects neighbors, livestock, wildlife, and the farm itself. Many modern farmers now use solar-powered pumps to move water from a creek into troughs placed away from fragile banks. This keeps cattle out of the stream, reduces erosion, protects water quality, and often gives the animals cleaner water than they would get by standing in a muddy creek. Number 5. The unpermitted stock pond. In the dry country of the American West, ranchers learned to survive by holding on to water wherever they could. If they found a low spot, a natural draw, or a place where rainwater already wanted to collect, they might bring in a bulldozer, push up an earthen dam, and wait for the next hard rain to fill it. The method. For a small amount of diesel fuel and a long Saturday of work, a rancher could create a stock pond that might water cattle for decades. It was simple, tough, and practical. In country where every gallon mattered, that pond could mean the difference between keeping a herd healthy through dry months or being forced to sell animals when the pasture burned up. The fine. But after the Clean Water Act of 1972, the definition of waters of the United States changed the way many of these projects were treated. The Army Corps of Engineers began asserting authority over certain seasonal drainages and temporary waterways. Today, building a pond on land that drains toward a navigable waterway may require a Section 404 permit, a process that can take months or even a year and cost thousands of dollars in engineering and paperwork. Skip the permit, and the daily federal civil penalties can become financially devastating. In 2017, a Wyoming rancher made national news after being fined more than $20 million for building a stock pond. The lesson. The laws around large-scale water capture can be complicated, but the old farming idea is still powerful. Catch water where it falls. Even if you cannot legally build a dam or dig a stock pond without permits, you can still use legal options such as rain gardens, swales, contour planting, and rain barrels where they are allowed. The goal is the same as it always was. Slow the water down, keep it on the land longer, reduce runoff, and make your farm or homestead more resilient during dry weather. Number 4. The family smokehouse. If there is one smell that carries the memory of old rural survival, it is the sharp, sweet scent of hickory smoke. On many mountain farms, the smokehouse was not just another outbuilding. It was one of the most important structures on the whole place. The method. These smokehouses were often built from chestnut logs, with a simple dirt floor and rafters strong enough to hold heavy cuts of pork. Farmers would hang hams, shoulders, and bacon overhead, while a slow fire smoldered in a central pit below. The meat was not cooked with high heat. Instead, cool smoke drifted upward for days or weeks, coating the meat with natural protective compounds. Salt pulled out moisture, the smoke discouraged spoilage, and the cool mountain air helped finish the preservation. A family could keep hundreds of pounds of pork, sometimes around 600 pounds, for many months or even years without relying on electricity. The fine. Today, modern food safety regulations look at that same traditional system very differently, especially if the meat is being sold. A dirt floor, open smoke, no sealed surfaces, and no electronic temperature monitoring can violate many parts of the FDA food code. In 2018, a man in Tennessee was investigated by federal agents and fined $4,000 for selling smokehouse bacon, made the same way his family had made it since 1879. In the end, he was forced to tear the smokehouse down. The lesson. What we lost here is more than an old building. We traded a resilient method of passive food preservation for deep dependence on refrigeration and the electrical grid. Selling smoked meat commercially requires approved facilities and strict food safety controls, but for personal family use, the skill of curing and smoking meat is still worth learning carefully. Knowing how to preserve food without a refrigerator is one of those old homestead abilities that can make a family more prepared, more independent, and more connected to the farm traditions that came before us. Number 3. Selling raw milk at the farm gate. Until the 1950s, getting fresh milk was often as simple as taking an empty glass quart jar and driving to a nearby farm. The method: you might pay just a few cents for milk straight from the cooler, still carrying the freshness of the morning milking. The cream rose thick to the top, rich enough that people used to say you could float a coin on it. Children grew up drinking it, families depended on it, and small dairies became part of the local community economy. It was not just a transaction. It was trust between neighbors. The fine. But as disease outbreaks became linked to crowded and unsanitary city dairies, pasteurization became the legal standard. In 1987, the FDA banned the interstate sale of raw milk. Today, raw milk laws vary widely from state to state. Retails are allowed in some places, including states like California and Pennsylvania, while selling raw milk is completely banned in 19 states. Take a quart jar of unpasteurized milk across the wrong state line to sell, and you could be facing a federal violation. In 2022, a Pennsylvania farmer was fined more than $5,000 and ordered to destroy his inventory. The lesson: the real power of the old farmgate milk sale was the relationship between producer and customer. People knew the farmer, saw the cows, and trusted the cleanliness of the operation. Today, many families still want that direct connection to real food, but the legal path can be complicated. That is why some farmers and consumers use herd share agreements, where a customer buys a share of a cow and pays the farmer to care for and milk that animal. Done properly under local law, it can be a way to support small dairies, maintain food choice, and keep the bond between farm and family alive. Number 2. Catching rainwater from the sky. In the dry states of the West, including places like Wyoming, Nevada, and New Mexico, well water was often hard, alkaline, and unpleasant for daily household use. So old farm families learned to save every clean drop that fell from the roof. The method: our great-grandmothers used large stone cisterns to catch rainwater from the house and barn roofs. That water was soft, free from harsh minerals, and useful for cooking, washing clothes, and preserving food. Best of all, the system worked quietly on its own. No motor, no pump, no electricity. When summer heat settled over the land, a full cistern could keep a household going when other water sources were poor or limited. The fine: believe it or not, from the late 1800s into the 1900s, many states passed water laws treating rainfall as part of the supply belonging to downstream rights holders. In Colorado, collecting rain from your own roof was restricted and even prosecuted until fairly recently. Today, rainwater harvesting is legal and often encouraged in most states, but restrictions still remain in some places. Colorado limits many homeowners to about 110 gallons or 2 rain barrels, while Utah allows larger storage but requires registration when collection reaches certain levels. The lesson: this old practice asks a powerful question: who really controls the water that falls on your own land? The practical answer today is simple. Know your local laws before you build. Then collect as much rainwater as you are legally allowed to store. In a time when droughts are becoming more common and water costs keep rising, even one full rain barrel can become a valuable tool for the garden, the homestead, and the animals that depend on you. Number 1. The community hog slaughter. Of all the old farm traditions that have faded away, this one may be the most painful to remember. For nearly 2 centuries, November was not just the start of cold weather. On many rural farms, it was hog-killing time. The method: after the first hard frost, when the flies were gone and the air was cold enough to handle meat safely, neighboring families would gather at one farm before sunrise. Everyone had a job. By midday, the hogs were dressed, the fat was being rendered into clean white lard over outdoor fires, and by afternoon, families were packing up fresh pork, hickory-smoked hams, sausage, and other cuts to take home. No one sent an invoice. No one stood around counting dollars. Labor was the payment, trust was the agreement, and community was the real wealth. Families worked side by side with sharp knives, hot fires, and hard-earned skill, feeding each other year after year. The fine: in 1967, the Wholesome Meat Act changed this tradition forever. The law placed strict limits on the sale, barter, or transfer of uninspected meat across property lines. That means sharing a country ham with a relative who lives down the road can technically fall into dangerous legal territory if it violates inspection rules. Commercial cases involving uninspected country pork have led to federal probation and fines reaching $10,000 per violation. During congressional testimony in 1966, one corporate attorney even described this old rural practice as uncontrolled processing that needed to be eliminated. The lesson: what disappeared was not just a way of processing meat, it was a piece of rural community life. Food was never only about calories. It was about trust, shared labor, family knowledge, and neighbors depending on one another. Today, the lesson is to rebuild local food networks wherever we still can. Know your local butcher, support small farmers who follow the difficult rules, and bring back the spirit of shared work through garden days, harvest gatherings, and local food cooperation. The old ways may look different now, but the need for community has not changed. Our ancestors did not use these forgotten farming practices because they were careless or desperate. They used them because they understood something practical and powerful about land, animals, seasons, and survival. They knew a farm was not just a place to produce food. It was a living system. Waste could become fertilizer, trees could feed livestock, water could be captured, smoke could preserve meat, and neighbors could become the strongest safety net a family had. Over time, many of these practices were pushed aside by modern rules, industrial systems, and commercial food structures. Some regulations were created for real reasons, especially around safety, disease, clean water, and public health. But in the process, we also lost many skills that once made families more independent and communities more connected. So here is the challenge for you today. Look at your own backyard, garden, homestead, or small farm. Which of these old skills speaks to you the most? Maybe it is setting up a legal rain barrel, planting a nut tree for your chickens, learning safe food preservation, improving your pasture water system, or simply getting to know the farmers and butchers in your area. Tell me in the comments, how many of these 10 methods did your grandparents or great-grandparents use? And which one would you like to bring back in a safe, legal, and practical way this season? If this journey into the old farming world gave you something valuable, hit the like button, subscribe to Farmyard Care, and share this video with someone who still remembers how much wisdom lived in the old ways. Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt, care for your animals well, and never stop learning.